Hello, here we go again. We are group 5, and this chapter is about coordination learning. So, basically, the basic principle of learning are always operating and always influencing human behavior. So, this model discusses about two most fundamental forms of learning, which is first one is classical coordinationing, and another one is instrumental coordinationing. So the two types of learning have been intensively studied because they have powerful effects on behavior and because they provide the method that allows scientists to analyze learning process rigorously. Let's talk about classical or Pavlovian coordinationing. So in his famous experiment, Pavlov rang a bell and then gave a dog some food. After repeating the pairing multiple times, the dog eventually treated the bell as a signal for food and began salivating in anticipation of the treat. Although classical conditioning may seem old and too simple, a theory it is widely studied today for at least two reasons, which is first, it is a straightforward test of associative learning that can be used to study others and more complex behaviors. Second, because classical conditioning is always occurring in our lives, have importance, and this grouping to in response to the bell is the coordination response or CR. So another one is instrumental of operant conditioning. Operant conditioning occurs when a behavior is associated with the occurrence of a significant event. This voluntary behavior is called an operant behavior. This expansion is going to exist in the first slide. So because it operates on the environment. And the dog food in Pavlov's experiment is called the unconditioned stimulus or US because it elicits an unconditioned response that is without any kind of training or teaching. The stimulus produces a natural or instinctual reaction. And another one, unconditioned response, is in classical conditioning an innate response that is elicited by stimulus before or in an absence of conditioning. And another one is unconditioned stimulus. It is the classical conditioning that elicits the response before condition occurs. Now, once the rat recognizes that it receives a piece of food every time it presses the lever, the behavior of lever pressing becomes reinforced. That is, the food pellets serve as reinforcers because they strengthen that rat's desire to engage with the environment in this particular manner. According to the third laws of effect, when a behavior has a positive effect or consequence, it is likely to be repeated in the future. And however, when a behavior has a negative consequence, it is less likely to be repeated as reinforcers, and effect that decrease them are referred to as punishers. So, an important of the distinction of operant conditioning is that it provides a method for studying how consequences influence voluntary behavior. So the rat's decision, for example, the rat decision to press the lever is voluntary, in a sense that the rat is free to make or repeat that response whenever it wants. Classical conditioning, on the other hand, is just the opposite, depending instead of involuntary. So whereas the rat must actively participate and perform some kind of behavior to attain its reward. The difference between two fundamental principles. So the two types of learning differ in many ways. Modern thinkers often emphasize the fact that they differ as illustrated here. in what is learned. In classical conditioning, the animal behaves as it learned to associate with stimulus with a significant event. And on the other hand, in operant conditioning, the animal behaves as if it has learned to associate a behavior with a significant event. So another difference is that the response in the classical situation is elicited by a stimulus that comes before it, whereas the response in the operant case is not elicited by any particular stimulus. Instead, operant behavior are essentially voluntary in.
Hello, Professor. My name is Manita Pulimata. My student ID is 621000635. For this is my part, useful things to know about classical conditioning. The classical conditioning has many effects on behavior. For example, in classical, the signal that food is also elicits the secretions of gastric acids. All of these respond to prepare the body for digestion. In the additionally, the classical elicits approach behavior and a state of excitement, and presenting a classical for food can also cause animal whose stomach are full to eat more food. And for another example, if someone used to take morphine, that signal will be like the dog is coming soon. That actually make the person more sensitive to pain because the person know a pain. The pain sense will soon be taking care of it, and your body become more sensitive. Interestingly, such conditions are compensatory response that decrease the impact of the drug on the body, that because the body has become more sensitive to pain. For this slide about the final effect of classical, that is they motivate ongoing operant behavior. And for example, if a lad had learned via operant conditioning that pressing a level will give it a drug, that the signal like drug is coming soon, the lad will work harder to press the level. And so classical have many effects that can contribute to significant behavior phenomena. So for the next slide, for this slide, I will talk about the learning process. Look at the picture. Stimuli A with an unconditioned stimuli. The sound is the sound of the bell. That is stimuli A is paired with food. That is the phase 1. In the second phase, a second conditioning and learning stimuli, that is stimuli B, that's present alongside stimuli A, such that the two of stimuli are paired with the unconditioned stimulus together. And look at the picture. A light is at and turned on, and the bell is rang in the same time. However, because the animal has already learned to association between stimulus A, that is bell, and food, and the animal doesn't learn an association between stimuli B, that the light, and the food. That is the conditions response only occur during the presentation of the stimuli A. That is all of my part. Thank you.
Erasing classic learning. This effect is called extension. What is extinction? Extinction in psychology refers to the fading this appearance through behavior. That's what we freely learn as association with another event. When it comes to extinction, most people connect it with the complete disappearance of dinosaurs, such as the white water buffalo in psychology. Extinction carries a similar meaning to learned behavior. For example, a child learned that throwing a random in the grocery checkout counter will cause his mom to buy his candy. He association random throwing with getting candy, but this reaction does not last forever. As mom stopped giving into those sweets, the child drew fever and fever random and stopped altogether. Eventually, the learned random have been extinction. Instrumental response come under stimulus control, association, and involuntary response to stimulus. Classic conditioning occurs when an association is formed between a biological significant natural stimulus and a neutral stimulus to cause an involuntary response. The natural stimulus is an unconditioned stimulus because it doesn't require an conditioning to cause the reaction. The neutral stimulus becomes a conditioning stimulus, and the involution response becomes a conditioned response. For example, of Pavlov's dog in the most famous example, Pavlov rang a bell every time he feeds his dog. Eventually, they began to salivate every time they hear the sound. Whether or not they receive food, the natural salivation becomes a conditioned response. In classic conditioning, extinction occurs when the conditioned stimulus is applied repeatedly without being paired with the unconditioned stimulus. Over time, the learned behavior occurs less often and eventually stops altogether, and conditioned stimulus return to neutral. In the example of Pavlov's dogs, after Pavlov subsequently rang a bell many times without bringing food, the dog gradually stopped salivating at the sound. Operant conditioning involves choice, association of voluntary behavior, and consequence. Operant conditioning refers to association and natural stimuli with reinforcement or punishment to change a voluntary behavior. Operant extinction refers to the weak and eventual stop of the voluntary conditioned response. For example, a child associated the sound of microwave with her favorite snack, and she ran into the kitchen. But after they used microwave several times without making the snack, she gradually stopped.
Okay, so in my slide, I'm going to talk about the cognition in instrumental. Why animals learn about the specific consequence of each behavior and will perform a behavior depending on how much they currently want. By in this experimental, we use the lab for the experimental by teach them to use the remote control that like which thing that they want between like the sweet that have a lot of glucose and the cheese. By the this experimental tell us that animals learn the cause and effect of behavior. It's up to themselves that they want or they don't want, and it is was like valuable enough for them to get it and want it. To the next slide, it's putting classical and instrumental conditioning together. You can see in this model the S, O, and R alphabet. It stands for S, stimulus, O, outcome, and R is the response. And in this model, we putting like the stimulus, outcome, and response together. By the first, I will go with RO. RO is look almost the same as the classic, but it's focused on their surprise and confusing for June, that what are they going to choose. And the RO is the response and outcome. Next, SO or stimulus and outcome. So when we talk about SO, it is the classical. Animal learns to connect everything together, and by this way, it super affect to their behavior. And next one is SR or stimulus and response. When we put it together, it is the relationship of the stimulus and the response by using the habit to doing things. And the last one, when we put the S, R, and O together, stimulus, outcome, and response together, stimuli and stimulus is the affection of worker to see the picture by like you think, imagine something by like you see something inside your head, and by in doing this thing, it make us like power up.
So now I'm going to give you some information about observational learning. Observing the others, the child can take note of the way in which they behave while playing the game. By watching the behavior of other kids, the child can figure out the rules of the game and even some strategies for doing well at the game. This is called the observational learning. Observational learning is a component of Albert Bandura's social learning theory, which posits that the individuals can learn novel responses by observation of key others' behaviors. Observational learning does not necessarily require reinforcement, but instead hinges on the presence of others, referred to as social models. Social models can typically of higher status or authority compared to the observer. By observing how the social models behave, an individual is able to learn how to act in a certain situation. The observational learning process consists of four parts. The first is attention. As quite simply, one must pay attention to what she or he is observing in order to learn. The second is retention. To learn, one must be able to retain the behavior she or he is observing in the memory. The third part is initiation. Acknowledges that the learner must be able to execute or initiate the learned behavior. And lastly, the observer must possess the motivation to engage in observational learning. The voodoo doll experiment. In this experiment, Bandura had children individually observe an adult social model interact with a clown doll called voodoo. For one group of children, the adult interact aggressively with voodoo, punching it, kicking it, throwing it, and even hitting it with in the face. Another group of children watch the adult interact with other toys, displaying no aggression towards voodoo. In both instances, the adult left, and the children were allowed to interact with voodoo on their own. Bandura found that children exposed to aggressive social model were significantly more likely to behave aggressive towards voodoo, hitting and kicking him compared to those exposed to non-aggressive model. The researchers conclude that the children in the aggressive group used their observation of the adult social model's behavior to determine that aggressive behavior toward voodoo was acceptable. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoy.